Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm Leighton Grey, your host, and this is Grey Matter. Well, we're hearing that within a very short period of time, perhaps as early as this summer, there are going to be food shortages in Canada. Many are wondering, how can this be possible in a quote unquote first world country? Canada's a rich country. How can we be so short of food? Well, today's commentary will hopefully try to explain some of that, or at least get you thinking about how your government is acting in order to destroy your family's ability to eat. It's called ration abundance. We will have nothing to eat and we will be happy. We begin with a quotation. Quote, "To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas." That's from a man named Brock Chisholm, who was the first director of the World Health Organization. In 2020, a team of academics from the University of Leeds in England produced a paper entitled Rationing and Climate Change Mitigation. They posited that rationing fuel, food, and even clothing could effectively fight climate change. The paper was accepted by the Journal of Ethics, Policy, and Environment in January 2023 and published. This is an extremist proposal, even if it came from the cult of climate zealots, but it's perhaps the most recent nudge toward the Great Reset and the New World Order. It fits seamlessly into the strategy propagandized by the World Economic Forum since 2020, namely, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. The first 8 projections for the world in 2032 appear in the dystopian 2020 promotional video produced for the World Economic Forum. So, how do the global elitists of the Klaus Schwab set plan to wean the bourgeoisie off our planet-destroying desire to own things and enjoy the fruits of our own labors? Well, the answer lies in the gradual process already set into motion. Phase 1 gets us all accustomed to consuming less, especially food. And what better way to accomplish this than to manufacture an existential crisis, which, if not met with drastic exigency, will unleash global Armageddon? What more effective method of getting us used to owning less than by limiting how much we can buy, all for the sake of our new idol, planet Earth? The Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman once famously wrote that, quote, "The government's solution to a problem is usually as bad as the original problem." He also said that the state is almost invariably at the root of the problems they claim to be solving at any given time. If no such problems exist, and of course they must, then our rulers construct imaginary straw men in order to expand their powers or to write new laws restricting individual liberty. We witness this phenomenon with COVID-19 lockdowns, and so too with the fallacy of anthropomorphic, human-made climate change. As fake crises go, this one is the GOAT, since it forecasts our certain annihilation but for state intervention. A threat of such great magnitude presents the ideal excuse to promote the Great Reset, which mass media and governments tell us is just a crazy right-wing conspiracy theory. The CBC, along with every other liberal-sponsored news organization, urges us to accept that the Great Reset and the New World Order will actually make our world a much better place in which we can all live equitably. The shocking truth, however, is that the Great Reset and the New World Order are quite real and represent what can only be properly described as a hostile Marxist takeover of absolutely everything. Proponents of the Great Reset and the New World Order, which include our new king in England, make no secret of their goal. They want a world government which will own everything and allocate resources according to autocratic caprice. Picture Marxism taking feudalism as its bride. In its infancy, such government will likely be comprised of the G7 leaders and CEOs of vast multinational corporations like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and their ilk. The Great Reset was christened by the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2020, but there's also a podcast and even a book. The authors of the recently published paper on Rationing are, like the World Economic Forum, candid about their strategy. They lean heavily for justification upon how World War II rationing in the West allegedly played a key role in achieving ultimate victory. But the academics acknowledge one salient difference between then and now. It is much easier to get people to adopt rationing where there is an actual shortage of a particular commodity. The only problem is getting us 21st century plebeians to accept rationing of things that remain obviously plentiful. The paper is rather chilling, however, in its reptilian anti humanity. It is written by people who relish the thought of conducting another grand experiment upon the unwashed animals of an Orwellian farm. They argue that the scarcity precursive is rationing already exists since we cannot afford to exhaust Earth's supposedly precious supply of fossil fuels. This is a curious thesis given that climate change activists now demand an immediate switch from oil, coal, and gas to green energy sources such as wind and solar. But if this plan is to abandon dependence upon fossil fuels, then why on earth ought we be concerned about burning up our remaining reserves? The answer, of course, is that mankind continues to rely heavily upon such fuels, and demand for them is projected to increase for many decades to come. Despite this, the academics boldly assert that the public must be subjected to state propaganda to condition our minds into acceptance of the new conditions for the Great Reset. Methods to normalize rationing are discussed, all of which boil down to tricking us into believing that limitations upon what we can buy, in what volumes, and at what prices is all perfectly legitimate and necessary for our survival. The specific problem of getting us to accept rationing of still plentiful products is addressed through government regulation to create shortages and then use fake scarcities to justify rationing. Never before was C.S. Lewis more right when he said, quote, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive," end quote. The plan is to create chronic fuel shortages to reduce stocks of just about every other consumer good and food, and then to introduce rationing as the panacea. The paper's authors say that all of this might just be temporary, but unlike Hitler, the sun monster is practically immortal. Why should we imagine that our globalist masters would ever declare the bogus problem solved when its existence is the source of their domineering power? As Professor Friedman once quipped, quote, "Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program," end quote. One is tempted to dismiss this paper as the mad musings of a couple of egghead academics, but that dangerously ignores that the toxic seeds of critical race theory, diversity, inclusion, equity, and many other idea pathogens now rotting our Western institutions from within were all planted by intellectuals. Public policy is often driven by such academic papers and studies, and if we have learned anything over the past 3 years, it is that conspiracy theories have a habit of becoming reality with startling regularity and rapidity. As Dr. Thomas Sowell explains, quote, "Intellectuals may like to think of themselves as people who speak truth to power, but too often they are people who speak lies to gain power," end quote. These intellectuals thus help the globalist cabal to plant seeds for the rest of us Untermenschen to accept what is coming: massive shortages. Some might think that this is just the powerful getting ahead of the curve, but as we have suspected for a long time, the World Economic Forum are not content to simply predict scarcity. They are instead manufacturing it for us. Poultry industries in Western nations are being decimated by bird flus of unprecedented virulence. Food plants continue to burn. Crops are failing. All of this is being engineered and blamed upon climate change. Energy decisions are being made by most Western nations, including Canada, to keep us on the verge of collapse. This is so that they can be ready for the big collective shove off the cliff at the appointed time. They want us to think it a spontaneous and organic result of climate change, when in fact, it has all been precisely plotted. Canada plans to join nearly every other nation in the world in adopting central bank digital currencies, which will transform actual capitalism into stakeholder capitalism before becoming a full blown global socialist solution to the problems that our rulers have created. Economic collapse will be translated into central fiscal control. Anyone wanting to buy or sell in any commodity will need to line up and qualify for the privilege. And this is not mere coincidence. It is instead all part of their coordinated machinations, the framework which was laid out by their godfather, Dr. Henry Kissinger, decades ago, when he said this: who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. So you see the connection. This is why the buzzword rationing now emanates from corporate media and government officials. According to plan, as with any PSYOP, it will be easier to get us to accept and even embrace rationing if they first advertise it through subtle repetition. Ration, ration, ration. They're already rationing produce down at the supermarket. We are told that it is about supply chains, bad weather, heating costs, and the Strait of Hormuz. But right now, in terms of messaging, it is more about pushing the word rationing than about any conceivable food shortage. We are to become conditioned to hearing this word, just as we did pandemic. This is part of a now familiar process of psychological and emotional manipulation. Get us acquainted with the basic idea of food scarcity so that we are all psychologically and emotionally primed when the planned reality is unveiled. Just as we were primed to clamor for a vaccine to a virus that only killed 0.01% of the population, we were fed words like lockdown, pandemic, mandate, and denier. Well, rationing is a word out of the past in the Western world used by our parents and grandparents. Just like European war and fascism, they are now en vogue. Just as in advertising, so too in politics and culture. Everything old is new again. So, we're expected to accept the reality of food rationing, even as our local landfills swell with edible produce and leftovers dumped there every single day. This manipulation is invariably about an iron hand sheathed in a velvet glove. Much of the messaging in the mass media is redolent of World War II and the fabled Blitz spirit. We're all in it together, making do, doing our bit, standing up for democracy, defending the free world, sacrifice and don't grumble, keep calm and carry on. On the subject of democracy, does anyone remember having the opportunity to vote on any of this? Did we vote to give governments the power to lock us up in our homes, to shut down our schools and universities, courthouses, airports, our pubs, restaurants, shops, gyms, and businesses, to tell us whom we could visit or have in our homes, whether we could go for a walk, travel within our own country, let alone abroad? Do you remember voting to empower employers to mandate experimental medical procedures for their staff? And who voted to demonize and exclude healthy people from civil society just because they might carry an invisible virus? Well, if you're like me, you cannot recall being invited to discuss or debate any of this. You were quite understandably distracted by the bombardment of state sponsored messaging and censorship by governments and the mass media. Or perhaps you were just one of the many who feared the ridicule, cancellation, or doxing that would have cost you your job. In the United States and Canada, and here in Canada, many citizens are asking themselves when they voted to have their government send billions of dollars to Ukraine at a time of critical hardship for millions unable to afford escalating domestic food, housing, healthcare, or heating costs. So often over the past few years, I've asked myself, who do these people think they are? All of them, once elected into office, begin herding us towards World War III while negating our God given freedoms. Who do people like Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre shouting war cries at us with Ukraine flags draped around their necks think they are to disregard liberty and our very existence as free individuals and spend their time posturing and politicking, fiddling while Rome burns? Who do these people think they are? Boldly creating and then ignoring hardship, enacting policies to destroy livelihoods, economies, and the health of millions, and then standing idly by while real people suffer the harms of their virtue signaling, of their power hungry propagandist distraction. Well, the stark reality is that we already have the potential to produce more than enough food, energy, and every other life sustaining commodity. Hydrocarbons and existing technology make any alleged shortages in the West no more than fraudulent fiction, but we are nevertheless being socialized to ration. The glaring paradox is that we are drowning in surplus on all sides. We have centuries worth of affordable energy under our feet, and yet are constantly bullied into a false reality that fewer and fewer people can afford to heat their homes or fuel their cars and trucks. Each year, we bulldoze countless tons of food into landfills while being told to do without erstwhile family foods. We do much the same with clothes like masks, which were worn before discarding them. We upgrade our Chinese made smartphones and place other tech into last year's offering bin, ignoring the lithium, cobalt, gold, and other precious metals mined by child slaves out of sight and out of mind. We will soon be commanded to junk our gas boilers, our stoves, and fuel burning automobiles. Meanwhile, our rulers siphon our carbon taxes into subsidies for Chinese made wind turbines and solar panels that will be toxic waste within less than a single generation. Nor is it just about consumer goods. Every moment of each day, we are deluged with information as well. So much chaff in which to hide the kernels of wheat. We drown in words but struggle desperately to find so much as a sentence worth reading. Meanwhile, the Cambridge Dictionary redefines words like woman, man, pandemic, and vaccine. And Puffin rewrites the Roald Dahl and Ian Fleming anthologies to cleanse of any words which might trigger or give offense. Dr. Seuss books are now too dangerous for children to read and have been replaced in school libraries by ones describing graphic homosexual erotica. Instead of being educated at school in objective, meaningful knowledge about our shared history, our heritage, and culture, about how to understand the world and to contribute to its betterment, our children are indoctrinated with propaganda, drilled with hateful ideologies predicated upon obsession, not with the content of one's character, but with the color of one's skin or sexual preferences, either real or imaginary. An 8-year-old boy with a smartphone and an internet connection can look at more naked women engaged in overt sexual acts than wise old King Solomon saw in a lifetime of concubine conquest. Sickening superfluity surrounds, and yet we are told to ration food in our supermarkets? Rationing tomatoes is but a symptom of how corrupted our food industry has become in the hands of corporate avarice bent on profit for the few at the expense of the many. None of this is, of course, the fault of the worthy farmers in places like Holland and Canada or the United States, who suffer under a governmental maze of regulations and red tape designed to impede and restrict the job of growing healthy food for the rest of us. New regulations make it legal to label as milk the white liquid derived from processing soy, almonds, and oats. There are to be crickets grounded into the flour that makes our bread, along with hundreds of other food products. Industrially produced vegetables are labeled meat, chicken, or even fish. They make oil from sunflowers and canola, process away its rancid toxicity, and then sell it in food, salad dressing, and as an ingredient in soap for getting rid of stubborn fabric stains. It is even in the baby food that became so rare that it was, yes, rationed during the pandemic. If food is so scarce that we need to begin rationing it, then why are we paying farmers to get out of the business altogether and sell off their lands to multinational corporations? Would it not make eminent sense to incentivize them to produce more food to meet the coming shortages? That way, they could make more money as the demand rises. Why are planes and ships burning diesel to transport exotic foods like avocados thousands of miles around the world from places where mass cultivation of them causes catastrophic damage to local water supplies? Are leaders like Mark Carney so clueless they do not know how to run the country for the benefit of the human beings they were elected to serve? Or are they knowingly in service of multinational corporations and the World Economic Forum? Are we simply to be fed a diet of propaganda and lies about health, about food, about climate, about war, about biology, about gender, and about race until we are so diseased, confused, exhausted, and anxious that we do not notice them rob and lock us down in a digital ghetto, supervised round the clock by the cameras and listening devices we pay dearly to carry around in our own pockets? Greed and unbridled power have brought us to the only destination that was ever in view, which is right here, right now. The problem is not a scarcity of food. It is rather an overabundance of lies that we keep buying to our great detriment and perhaps our ultimate destruction. The greatest threat to Canada's food economy today is not a recession. It is the illusion that someone else is responsible for our economic decline. We are the only G7 member with their shrinking economy. Canada's economy is now smaller than it was just a year ago when Mark Carney took office. The country has recorded 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP, and many economists now consider Canada to be in a technical recession. Predictably, much of the blame has been directed at the bad orange man south of the border, President Donald Trump, and the uncertainties surrounding trade relations with the US. Trade tensions have certainly not helped. Businesses dislike uncertainty, and agri-food is particularly vulnerable to disruptions in cross-border commerce. But to suggest that our economic woes are primarily Trump's fault is both convenient and misleading. The truth is that Canada's economy was showing signs of weakness long before the latest round of trade disputes. Productivity growth has lagged behind the US for years. Business investment has remained disappointingly weak. GDP per capita has struggled despite rapid population growth. Housing costs have soared. Infrastructure has failed to keep pace with demographic expansion, and many sectors have become increasingly dependent upon government spending, which only drives up inflation. Trump may have added pressure to an already fragile system, but he certainly did not create the underlying vulnerabilities. We have someone else to blame for that. And this matters because while Canada's food economy has thus far remained fairly resilient, it does not operate in isolation from broader financial realities. Agriculture and agri-food continue to perform relatively well compared to many other sectors. We may postpone buying homes or cars or new appliances, but we all still need to eat. Grocery stores remain busy. Food manufacturers continue to produce. Farmers keep planting, harvesting, and raising livestock. Food exports still support economic activity nationwide, for now. Yet, this resilience must not be mistaken for immunity. If economic weakness persists, the consequences for agri-food will eventually become more apparent. The first signs are already emerging in food service, where many restaurants are facing softer demand as consumers become increasingly price sensitive. Rising labor costs, occupancy expenses, insurance premiums, and financing costs continue to squeeze margins. For many operators, profitability has become increasingly difficult to sustain. The greater concern, however, lies in investment and competitiveness. Food producers and processors facing economic uncertainty may postpone expansion plans. Farmers may delay equipment purchases or modernization efforts. Investors might choose to place capital elsewhere. The danger is that the sector will gradually lose momentum even as their competitors accelerate. Across the US, billions of dollars continue to flow into new food processing facilities, logistics infrastructure, and agricultural innovation. South American producers are expanding their global footprint. Other countries are aggressively pursuing productivity gains and export opportunities. Meanwhile, Canada risks becoming complacent because our food economy continues to perform reasonably well despite the overall economy sliding into recession. This is why the recession debate really matters. The issue is not whether Canadians will continue to buy food. Of course we will. We have to. The issue is whether Canada can maintain a competitive agri-food sector capable of attracting investment, creating jobs, driving innovation, and generating long-term growth. A shrinking economy of rationed abundance may not immediately trigger a food shortage, but it can slowly undermine the conditions making further growth possible. Canada's food economy is not yet in recession. In many respects, it remains one of the country's strongest economic pillars. But no sector can indefinitely outrun the broader economy. Blaming Trump for Canada's economic challenges may be politically expedient, but it does not a thing to address the structural issues caused by 11 years of disastrous economic policy. If the Carney government wants the food economy to remain a source of strength, then they will need to focus less upon finding external villains and more upon restoring competitiveness right here at home. Canada did not suddenly run out of wealth in 2015. It ran out of wisdom. A country with energy, farmland, minerals, timber, ports on 3 oceans, abundant fresh water, workers, and direct access to the American market, incredibly, is in economic decline. But the recession is not the whole story. It is just the receipt. The real story is how a country this rich became so fragile. Canada was not poverty-stricken. It was instead managed into weakness. For years, the people in charge treated production as a problem, investment as a threat, energy production as sinful, and prosperity like something that could be delivered through socialist slogans, subsidies, and speeches. Now it is time to pay the ferryman. The deeper question is not whether the economy shrank for 2 successive quarters. The big question is why a nation with so much natural advantage and talent keeps producing weakness. As Lord Conrad Black explained in his 2018 book, The Canadian Manifesto, Canada should be an economic fortress, an energy superpower, a financial juggernaut. We have oil, gas, uranium, potash, timber, grain, cattle, critical minerals, ports, rail, and some of the most productive people on earth. We sit adjacent to the largest consumption market in world history. We have everything required to build a serious country. According to Black, quote, "The bell of opportunity tolls for us, and the world, for once, will listen. It is our turn," end quote. And yet here we are, watching growth stall while politicians explain it away as if recession is just a passing weather pattern. It is not weather, and it's not climate, but it is consequence. Ottawa did not create every problem in the Canadian economy, but it did help create the conditions which made us so brittle. Our elite governing class became obsessed with managing the economy from above while weakening the very people who actually create the economy from below. And so the result is not mysterious. In fact, it's rather predictable. Canada is a resource nation that often acts embarrassed by its own resources. That's insanity. The world needs our energy. The world needs food. Canada grows it abundantly. The world needs fertilizer. Canada produces it. The world needs uranium, minerals, lumber, metals, and reliable supply chains. Well, we can provide all of those. Conrad Black is absolutely right about all of it. Too often, our leaders treat the productive economy as something to be constrained rather than unleashed. They speak of transition before they have secured replacement. They speak of climate targets while ignoring energy security. They speak of affordability while making production more expensive. They speak of sovereignty while crippling the industries that give our country leverage. They tell us that there is no business case for selling liquid natural gas to Germany and Japan, and then we watch those countries pay billions to the US instead. A nation cannot regulate itself into greatness. It cannot tax itself into productivity. It cannot shame its workers, freeze its builders, frighten away its investors, and then wonder why the whole economy stalls. This land is still rich. Make no mistake about that. Our people are still capable. The weakness is not in the soil, it's in the ones governing us. Since 2015, Canada has failed to build enough resilience, internal strength, and national confidence to face our present challenges. So the recession is not the disease, it's only the symptom. The disease is a governing class that thinks prosperity comes from programs rather than from production, from slogans instead of investment, from bureaucracy instead of builders, from climate announcements instead of pipeline approvals, from state control rather than private confidence. That disease has been spreading for years throughout the body politic of this nation. This is not normal or inevitable, however, nor is this the natural condition of Canada. This is what happens when we forget how wealth is actually created. Canadians do not need another speech about resilience. We don't need another slogan. We don't need another committee, a task force, summit, framework, or photo op. We need to become a nation worth investing in again. And that means approving big projects, defending our borders, respecting the West, unleashing energy production, defending agriculture from foreign predation, building infrastructure, rewarding hard work, restoring confidence, and remembering that prosperity is not something printed at the Royal Canadian Mint. It is built by people who get up early, who take risks, who put capital to work, who hire employees, who move goods, who raise animals, who seed fields, who weld pipe, who mine ore, who cut timber, who run trucks, and who generally keep the real country alive and fed. A nation this rich should not be explaining why it is weak. A nation so blessed should not be managed into decline. A nation with this much land, energy, food, water, skill, and grit should not be waiting for government permission to grow. We did not get here because Canada lacks wealth. We got here because the people in power forgot what wealth is, where it comes from, and who actually builds it. The Lord's first commandment to mankind in Genesis chapter 9, verse 7 is this: "And you, be ye fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein." So our God is a God of abundance, not of scarcity or of lack. We need to heed His commandments, and not those of the globalist cabal telling us that the purpose of humanity is to own nothing and be happy. We close with a quotation, a rather apt one, from Gavin Nascimento, who said, "The problem is not that there is a lack of money, food, water, or land. The problem is that we've given control of these resources to psychopaths."
Hungry for truth beyond the television? Well, extend the conversation with Grey Matter online. Grey Matter's insights continue in your inbox. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter where we dive deeper into the spiritual battles facing Canadian families today. Equip yourself to stand firm in your faith and lead with godly wisdom. Join our growing community of truth seekers at substack.com/graymatternewsletter. Subscribe today and never miss the Canadian perspective on what matters most. If you value the conversations we have here every week on Grey Matter, then you know the cultural and legal battles we're facing aren't just political, they're spiritual, and they're fighting the very foundations of Western civilization. If you're ready for an uncompromising, legally precise defense of our civil liberties, our traditional values, and the rule of law, Leighton's new book, Trials, Tribulations, and Truth, was written for you. Join the defense. Grab your copy of Trials, Tribulations, and Truth on Amazon right now by clicking the link in the show notes, or go to thegraymatterpodcast.com. battle has always been over people and ideas, but they're just the targets. The real enemies are spiritual principalities and powers. Grey Matter's purpose is to reach out with the voice of Christian truth to men between 18 and 44. We believe that these sons and fathers are Christ's inheritance. Join us financially and help us to speak so Canadians hear truth that sets men free and brings families to Jesus. Contact us by email at greymatterconnect@gmail.com or mail us at Post Office Box 2436, Fort Macleod, Alberta, postal code T0L0Z0. Thank you for your support.